You need to stop that immediately. You're blocking the sidewalk.
Blocking what? I'm standing on the church property.
I see a suspicious man loitering. You're trespassing.
I bought this
I don't
property
care
for
if
the congregation 15 years ago. I am the pastor.
I don't care if you're a pastor. You're leaving now.
You are arresting a man of God for standing on his own land?
This is a federal lawsuit.
Officer Vincent Morrison had been with the Chicago Police Department for 16 years. In those 16 years, he'd compiled a record that should have ended his career long before that sunny June morning. 23 complaints. 23. 20 of them involving accusations of harassment or unlawful detention against black people in affluent or predominantly white areas of the city. A black family having a picnic in Lincoln Park was questioned for trespassing. A black woman jogging through Streeterville was stopped and searched for suspicious behavior. A black teenager skateboarding in Old Town was detained for disturbing the peace. Each complaint ended the same way. Mandatory community relations training that Morrison attended but never internalized. No real discipline, no meaningful consequences. One June morning in Chicago, his 16-year pattern of assuming black people didn't belong in affluent white spaces finally confronted someone who'd spent 3 decades building one of the city's most respected congregations. And that confrontation would end Morrison's career, cost the city $18 million, and expose a department that had ignored 23 identical complaints over 16 years. A black man in his late 50s, Reverend Dr. Michael Hayes, was standing on the front lawn of Grace Community Church in Lincoln Park, watering the flower beds he'd planted himself the previous spring. His clerical collar was visible under his gardening jacket, his name was on the church sign by the street, and his car with Senior Pastor on the reserved parking placard sat in the lot. No crime, no violation, no suspicious behavior, just a pastor maintaining his church grounds on a Saturday morning. But Officer Morrison saw him through a lens so warped by assumptions about who belongs at expensive churches in white neighborhoods that he couldn't process a black man with a garden hose as the legitimate pastor. He couldn't imagine that spiritual leadership in prestigious pulpits weren't limited by the racial boundaries Morrison enforced in his mind, and couldn't accept that the person he was about to confront had more authority in that building than Morrison would ever possess. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Chicago, Illinois. Lincoln Park, one of the city's most affluent neighborhoods. Tree-lined streets with Victorian-era homes, boutique shops, organic markets, and churches with historic architecture and wealthy congregations. Grace Community Church sits on a prime corner lot, a beautiful Gothic revival building constructed in 1887 with stained glass windows, a bell tower, and meticulously maintained grounds. The property is worth an estimated $45 million. The congregation includes doctors, lawyers, executives, and families who've attended for generations. It was 9:30 on a Saturday, morning in June. The temperature was a comfortable 72 degrees, heading toward a high near 80 degrees. Birds sang in the old oak trees. A few neighbors were out walking dogs or heading to farmers markets, the kind of peaceful weekend morning where nothing dramatic typically happens. Reverend Dr. Michael Hayes had been the senior pastor of Grace Community Church for 15 years. 15 years of leading worship services, performing weddings and funerals, counseling congregants through crises, overseeing a staff of 12, and managing a multi-million-dollar budget. He'd revitalized a congregation that was declining when he arrived, growing it from 200 members to over 1,200. He'd launched a food pantry that served 500 families monthly, a homeless outreach program, youth mentorship initiatives, and community development projects. He'd completed his Master of Divinity at Princeton Theological Seminary, his Doctor of Ministry at Duke, and had written 2 books on urban ministry and racial reconciliation. He'd been featured in Christianity Today, invited to speak at denominational conferences, and served on the boards of 3 nonprofit organizations. His sermons were thoughtful and challenging. His leadership was visionary. His congregation loved him. He'd been hired unanimously by the church board after a 2-year search. When Reverend Hayes was called to Grace Community 15 years ago, he knew he'd be the first black senior pastor in the church's 135-year history. The congregation was 92% white, located in one of Chicago's whitest neighborhoods, with a legacy of traditional worship and conservative theology. But the search committee had been intentional about seeking diverse candidates. They'd wanted someone who could bridge divides, speak prophetically about justice, and lead them into a more inclusive future. They'd chosen him. They'd celebrated him. Most of the congregation had embraced his leadership warmly, but not everyone. Over 15 years, there had been incidents. Anonymous notes left in the offering plate questioning his qualifications. A few families who'd left when he was hired, unable to accept a black pastor. Comments from visitors who'd assumed he was the janitor or a guest speaker, not the senior pastor. A neighbor who'd called the police once before when she saw him entering the church early on a Sunday morning, assuming he was breaking in. Each incident had stung, but Reverend Hayes had handled them with grace, choosing to focus on the majority who supported him rather than the minority who couldn't accept him. That Saturday morning, Reverend Hayes was doing what he often did on weekends, taking care of the church grounds. The flower beds along the front walkway needed watering. The landscaping crew came on Wednesdays, but he enjoyed the meditative work of gardening, the simple satisfaction of nurturing growing things. He'd changed into old jeans and a work jacket over his clerical collar. He'd come straight from a morning prayer, meeting in his office. He'd grabbed the hose from the maintenance shed, turned on the water, and was methodically watering each bed, lost in thought about tomorrow's sermon. He was standing on his own church property, maintaining grounds he was responsible for, doing work he'd done countless times before. He had every right to be there. The church owned the property. He was the senior pastor. His name was on the sign. He belonged there. But Officer Vincent Morrison, responding to a call about a suspicious person, saw something entirely different. Do you think churches should inform neighbors about their pastoral staff to prevent false reports? Drop your answer below. Morrison had been with Chicago PD for 16 years, assigned to patrol in affluent neighborhoods for the past 10. His supervisors described him as responsive to community concerns, which was code for aggressive about investigating reports from white residents about black people in their neighborhoods. In 16 years, he generated 23 formal complaints. 20 of them involved black people in predominantly white areas. A black contractor working on a home in Old Town. Morrison questioned him for over an hour, demanded to see permits, called the homeowner to verify employment. The contractor was licensed and hired legitimately. Complaint filed, dismissed with sensitivity training. A black woman birdwatching in Lincoln Park. Morrison stopped her, searched her bag, questioned why she was really in the park. She was a member of the Audubon Society conducting a survey. Complaint filed, closed with community engagement workshop. A black man waiting outside a restaurant in River North. Morrison detained him, ran warrant checks, accused him of loitering. The man was waiting for his wife, who was inside using the restroom. Complaint filed, resolved with implicit bias training. Every complaint told the same story. Black people in white spaces. Morrison assumes they don't belong. Morrison questions, demands proof, creates confrontations. Complaints filed, training assigned. No actual consequences, no real accountability. Chicago PD had a file on Morrison that documented 23 complaints over 16 years. That's an average of 1.4 complaints per year, with 20 following the exact same pattern. But the department treated each incident in isolation, never connecting them into the obvious pattern they formed. So Morrison kept patrolling, kept stopping, kept assuming. That morning, Morrison received a call from dispatch. Suspicious person reported at Grace Community Church in Lincoln Park. Caller stated an unknown black male was on the church property, possibly casing it for robbery or vandalism. Caller insisted the church had a white pastor and staff. Morrison responded within minutes. This was exactly the kind of call he lived for, protecting valuable property, keeping neighborhoods safe, preventing crime before it happened. He pulled up to the church and immediately spotted what the caller had reported: a black man in jeans and a jacket, standing on the lawn with a hose, water running. In Morrison's mind, this looked suspicious. Historic church, expensive neighborhood, black man with access to the property. Something doesn't add up. He didn't consider that pastors maintain their own church grounds. He didn't notice the clerical collar visible at the man's neck. He didn't observe the reserved for senior pastor placard on the car in the lot. He saw what his biases trained him to see. A black man who didn't belong at a white church, who must be trespassing or planning something, who needed to be removed. Morrison parked his patrol car at the curb and approached with his hand hovering near his service weapon. Reverend Hayes was watering the rose bushes near the front entrance when he heard footsteps on the sidewalk. He looked up and saw a police officer approaching, his expression stern. His heart sank immediately. He'd been through this before. The assumption that he didn't belong, the demand for explanation, the humiliation of having to prove he was the pastor of his own church. He'd hoped those days were behind him. He was wrong. You need to leave this property immediately. Reverend Hayes turned off the hose and straightened up, his movements calm and deliberate. Excuse me? I'm the pastor here. This is my church. Morrison's expression didn't change. The property owner called about loitering. You need to move along. Reverend Hayes felt a familiar anger rise but kept his voice controlled. Officer, I am the senior pastor of Grace Community Church. I've served here for 15 years. I'm watering the flower beds. This is my job. The church is closed. You shouldn't be here. The church is never closed to the pastor. I have keys. I have an office inside. My name is on the sign right there. He pointed to the church sign that read, Grace Community Church, Reverend Dr. Michael Hayes, Senior Pastor. Morrison glanced at the sign, then back at Reverend Hayes. Anyone can put a name on a sign. Do you have identification proving you work here? I have my driver's license. I have church business cards. I have keys to every door in this building. I have 15 years of employment records in my office. What exactly do you need to see? Sir, this church is a predominantly white congregation. I don't think you belong here. This is where assumptions become insults. Officer Vincent Morrison had responded to a call from a neighbor who'd seen a black man on church property and assumed crime. That neighbor had never attended Grace Community, had never met the pastoral staff, but had decided that a black man at a white church must be doing something wrong. And Morrison, instead of questioning that assumption, escalated it into an accusation of trespassing based purely on race. You don't think I belong at the church where I've preached for 15 years? Officer, I'm Reverend Dr. Michael Hayes. I'm the senior pastor. I was hired. In 2008, I preach here every Sunday. I perform weddings and funerals. I counsel congregants. I oversee a staff of 12 people. This is my church. Morrison stepped closer. If you're really the pastor, why are you doing yard work? Because pastors maintain their churches. Because I enjoy gardening. Because this is my responsibility. Is there a law against pastors watering flowers? I need to verify your claim. Stay here while I contact the church administrator. The church administrator won't be in until Monday, but you can call any of our board members. You can call our denominational office. You can walk inside with me right now, and I'll show you my office with my name on the door, my diplomas on the wall, and 15 years of sermons in my filing cabinets. A car pulled up to the curb. An elderly white woman got out, a member of the congregation for 40 years. Reverend Hayes, good morning. She walked up the sidewalk, then noticed the police officer. Is everything all right? Morrison turned to her. Ma'am, do you know this man? Her expression shifted from friendly to confused to angry in rapid succession. Know him? That's Reverend Hayes. He's our pastor. He's been our pastor for 15 years. Officer, why are you questioning him? We received a call about someone trespassing on church property. Trespassing? This is his church. His office is on the second floor. He's here 6 days a week. Whoever called you made a terrible mistake. Another voice called from across the street. A man in his 60s, also a longtime member, walking his dog. Reverend Hayes, what's going on? The woman called back. This officer thinks Reverend Hayes is trespassing at his own church. The man hurried across the street, his face reddening with anger. Officer, that's Reverend Dr. Michael Hayes. He's the senior pastor of Grace Community. He's been here since 2008. I was on the search committee that hired him. My daughter got married in this church and he performed the ceremony. What is happening here? Morrison's certainty wavered, but his pride held firm. I'm responding to a call about suspicious activity. Suspicious activity? He's watering flowers. He does this every weekend. Half the neighborhood has seen him out here gardening. Reverend Hayes spoke calmly, but his voice carried the weight of exhaustion. Officer, I appreciate that you're responding to a call, but what's happening right now is that someone saw a black man on church property and assumed I was a criminal. You arrived and made the same assumption. You didn't verify anything. You didn't ask for my credentials. You just told me to leave based on your belief that black people don't belong at white churches. Morrison reached for his radio. Dispatch, I need a supervisor at Grace Community Church on Lincoln Park West. And I'm calling my attorney, Reverend Hayes said, pulling out his phone, because this is harassment, and it needs to be documented. Should officers face consequences for ordering people to leave their own property without verification? Let me know what you think. Within 12 minutes, a supervisor arrived. Sergeant Patricia Coleman stepped out of her vehicle, a 28-year veteran who'd worked with Morrison before and had serious concerns about his approach to calls in white neighborhoods. She'd read Morrison's complaint file. She'd recommended discipline after complaint 15. She'd been overruled by command staff who valued Morrison's proactive policing in affluent areas. She approached and immediately assessed the situation. A historic church with beautiful grounds, a black man in a clerical collar holding a garden hose, a patrol car at the curb, and 2 angry church members defending their pastor. No signs of crime, no signs of trespassing, just another Vincent Morrison special. Morrison, what's the situation? Call about trespassing. Subject claims to be the church pastor, but I don't claim to be the pastor, Reverend Hayes interrupted. I am the pastor. For 15 years. My name is on the sign. My office is in that building. These are members of my congregation. And Officer Morrison ordered me to leave my own church based on the assumption that black people don't belong here. Coleman looked at the church sign. Grace Community Church. Reverend Dr. Michael Hayes, Senior Pastor. She looked at Reverend Hayes's clerical collar. She looked at the 2 church members standing protectively beside him. She looked at Morrison with barely contained frustration. Reverend Hayes, I'm Sergeant Coleman. Can you provide identification showing you work here? Reverend Hayes pulled out his wallet and handed her his driver's license, his church business card listing him as Senior Pastor, and his key card for the building with his photo and title. Coleman examined each item carefully. Everything legitimate, everything consistent, everything proving exactly what he'd said from the beginning. She pulled out her phone and called the church's main number listed on the sign. An automated message played, "You've reached Grace Community Church. Our office hours are Monday through Friday 9 to 5. Our senior pastor is Reverend Dr. Michael Hayes. For pastoral emergencies, press 1. She hung up and turned to Morrison with an expression that could freeze water. He's the pastor. Everything confirms it. Why didn't you verify this before ordering him to leave his own church? The caller said, the caller was wrong, and you should have checked before harassing a pastor on his own property. She turned to Reverend Hayes. Reverend, I sincerely apologize. This should not have happened. Officer Morrison will be placed on administrative leave pending investigation. If you wish to file a complaint, I'll provide all necessary information. Reverend Hayes looked at Morrison, then at Coleman. Sergeant, this is the second time in 15 years I've had police called on me at my own church. The first time. The officer apologized when he realized his mistake and left. This time, Officer Morrison didn't just make a mistake. He made an assumption based on race and stuck to it even when I explained who I was. He told me, I don't belong at my own church because the congregation is predominantly white. The elderly woman spoke up, her voice shaking with anger. Sergeant, I've been a member of this church for 40 years. Reverend Hayes is the best pastor we've ever had. He's transformed this congregation, and this officer treated him like a criminal for watering flowers. Coleman spoke into her radio. Dispatch, cancel that call. Church pastor verified. No trespassing situation. Requesting a captain to respond. She turned to Morrison. Badge and radio. Administrative leave. Effective now. Morrison's face went pale. Sergeant, I was responding to a call. You ordered a pastor to leave his own church without verifying anything. You made assumptions based on race. You've done this 23 times in 16 years, and it ends today. Badge, radio, now. Morrison handed them over, his hands shaking. Within 20 minutes, a captain arrived, followed shortly by 2 members of the church board who'd heard what happened and rushed over. The story spread quickly through the congregation. By that evening, the denominational leadership had been notified. By Sunday morning, Reverend Hayes preached to a standing room only crowd about grace, forgiveness, and the ongoing work of confronting racism. By Monday afternoon, his attorney had been contacted. The lawsuit was filed 6 weeks later, naming Officer Vincent Morrison, his supervisors who'd ignored 23 complaints over 16 years, and the Chicago Police Department. The allegations were extensive: harassment and discrimination based on race, unlawful order to vacate private property, violation of civil rights, intentional infliction of emotional distress, deliberate indifference to Morrison's pattern of racially motivated stops, interference with religious exercise under the First Amendment. The complaint included Morrison's complete record, 23 complaints over 16 years, 20 involving black people in white neighborhoods, all documented, all dismissed with training that never changed behavior. Chicago city attorneys reviewed the case and found no defense. Multiple church members witnessed the incident. The church sign clearly identified Reverend Hayes as senior pastor. He had credentials proving his position. Morrison had no legal basis for ordering him to leave church property. The pattern of complaints showed deliberate indifference by the department. The denominational leadership issued statements of support. The congregation rallied behind their pastor. The case became a symbol of how racism persists even in progressive spaces. The city settled 24 months later. $18 million paid to Reverend Dr. Michael Hayes, the largest settlement in Chicago history for racial profiling. The amount reflected not just the unlawful stop, but the constitutional violations, the harm to religious exercise, the defamation to his professional reputation, and the department's 16 years of enabling Morrison's pattern. Officer Vincent Morrison was terminated 13 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was comprehensive. Officer Morrison harassed a church pastor on church property, ordering him to leave based on racial assumptions rather than facts. He failed to verify readily available information proving Dr. Hayes' position. He made explicit statements that Dr. Hayes didn't belong at the church because of the congregation's racial composition. His pattern of similar conduct, documented through 23 complaints in 16 years, demonstrates a clear inability to serve without racial bias. Employment terminated immediately. Morrison's name was entered into the National Decertification Index. His 16-year law enforcement career ended. The union attempted to fight the termination. The city provided Morrison's complaint file, witness statements from church members, and the church's documentation of Reverend Hayes' 15-year tenure. The union withdrew the appeal after reviewing the evidence. Reverend Hayes testified before Chicago City Council. "I'm a pastor. I've dedicated 30 years to ministry, 15 of them at Grace Community Church. I've preached over 700 sermons there. I've performed 150 weddings. I've buried 200 people. I've counseled thousands through crises. And Officer Morrison told me to leave my own church because I'm black and the congregation is white." He paused. 23 complaints in 16 years. 20 involving black people in white neighborhoods. That's not mistakes. That's a pattern. A pattern your department ignored until it targeted someone with a congregation of 1,200 people and a denomination backing him. He paused again. $18 million is what it costs when you ignore complaints for 16 years. But money doesn't undo being told you don't belong at the church you've led for 15 years. It doesn't erase being ordered off property you're responsible for. And it doesn't prevent the next officer with 23 complaints from doing the same thing. Chicago PD implemented reforms 16 months later. Mandatory verification before any trespassing orders on institutional property, automatic investigation at 3 similar complaints, body camera review for all religious property calls, partnership with faith communities to educate officers about diverse leadership, command accountability for officers with documented patterns. Why do departments wait for complaint 23 instead of acting on complaint 3? Comment your thoughts. This wasn't about one June morning. This was about a department that tolerated Vincent Morrison for 16 years, despite 23 documented complaints showing the exact same bias. The pattern was obvious from complaint 5. It was undeniable by complaint 10. But Chicago PD kept Morrison on patrol, kept assigning him to affluent white neighborhoods, and kept ignoring the warnings until he finally harassed someone with a congregation, a denomination, and a platform to demand accountability. Reverend Dr. Michael Hayes paid the price, humiliated on his own church lawn, ordered to leave property he was responsible for, told he didn't belong at the church he'd served for 15 years. Vincent Morrison's career is over. That's consequence. The city paid $18 million. That's accountability. But those measures came after 23 complaints in 16 years. 16 years of victims who didn't have congregations to defend them. 16 years of black people who were harassed for existing in white spaces and had no recourse. Comment if this should be mandatory. 3 similar complaints within 3 years triggers automatic investigation and potential termination. No more isolated treatment. Pattern recognition becomes policy. And if you believe these stories matter, if you think 23 complaints over 16 years should have resulted in action after complaint 3, then hit that subscribe button. We're exposing departments that ignore obvious patterns. We're demanding better. We're fighting for everyone who's been profiled for existing in spaces others don't think they belong. This isn't about one officer or one pastor. It's about systems that let patterns continue and the people who pay the price for that willful blindness.